I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
Hello, I'm James Brown, and on behalf of the Eastern Church of Christ located in Toronto, Canada, I'd like to welcome you to today's edition of Walking Through the Bible, a podcast where we seek to study the Bible and the Bible alone. Please stick around afterwards for information on how you can contact us. But for now, please go to the book of Genesis, and we'll turn you over to Jeremy Disocam for our study of the day.
Thank you, James, and welcome to all of our viewers. This is the 172nd lesson in our study of Genesis. Yesterday, we covered Genesis chapter 50, verses 14 to 21, discussing Joseph's brothers pleading once again for Joseph's forgiveness. If you missed that episode and would like to watch it, you can find it and all of our other podcasts on our website at www.eastendchurch.org. You can also find them on our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/EastEndChurchOfChrist under the Walking Through the Bible Genesis playlist. Today, we're going to begin with Genesis 50, verse 22, and read through verse 26. The text that you'll see on the screen is from the English Standard Version, but you're welcome to follow along with any version that you have. So let's now read Genesis 50, beginning at verse 22. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. In the last episode, we discussed the events that occurred not too long after the death of Jacob. It was there that we discovered that the brothers still felt guilty about selling Joseph as a slave into Egypt. They asked him for forgiveness, to which he replied that he could not speak against God, for even though they meant what they did for evil, God used it for good. In today's reading, we find that 54 years have passed by, meaning that now the children of Israel have spent 71 years in Egypt. During that time, Joseph has been able to see his descendants multiply. There is a little bit of controversy as to whether this passage tells us that Joseph lived to see his great-grandchildren or his great-great-grandchildren. But either way, Joseph could easily have lived long enough to see both. Remember, Exodus 1 is going to tell us that after Jacob died, the children of Israel began to multiply rapidly, meaning that the children would have to marry young in order to have so many children. If the sons of Ephraim and Manasseh all got married when they were about 20, and all their children got married around the same age as well, this would lead to more than enough time for great-great-grandchildren to be known by Joseph, as he lived to 110 years old. We know from reading Exodus 6:16 that Levi lived to 137 years old, meaning that he would survive Joseph by about another 23 years. Now, we don't know how old any of the other 10 brothers were when they died, but it is probably safe to assume that the other brothers were still alive at the end of the book of Genesis as well. So when Joseph called his brothers together, he made them swear that his bones would not be left in Egypt, but be carried with the children of Israel when they left Egypt for Canaan. Joseph by this time had lived 93 years of his life in Egypt, so one might have thought that he would want to be buried in Egypt, the land where he spent most of his life, and the land where he spent most of his life in charge under Pharaoh. But this is not what Joseph desired. He was a son of Israel, and his descendants would have an inheritance in the promised land, so Joseph didn't want his bones being buried somewhere in Egypt. He wanted them buried in Canaan. True to their word, when Israel left Egypt a couple hundred years later, Exodus 13:19 says that they carried Joseph's bones with them. The book of Genesis thus concludes by stating that Joseph died at 110 years old and was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. Looking back at the life of Joseph, we can see how the providence of God can work through a man in order to accomplish the Lord's purpose. God was the one who sent Joseph dreams as a boy, dreams that caused his brothers to hate him, yes, but dreams that foretold the future. And yes, Joseph was sold as a slave into Egypt, but he never lost his faith in God, and because of that, God was with him. God protected Joseph in the house of Potiphar while Joseph was in prison, and he even brought about the events that elevated Joseph into being second in command in Egypt. Why did God do this? So that the children of Israel wouldn't die in the famine. So even though we don't always notice God working in our lives while we live in the moment, when we look back on our lives later, let's not be surprised to note all the possible ways that God could have been working in our lives as well. So that concludes our textual look at the book of Genesis. Even though the book of Exodus is chronologically next, we said when we began these podcasts that we would be largely alternating between the Old and New Testaments. So following our review, we will begin our next study in the book of Matthew. Assuming everything goes according to plan, we will return to the Old Testament, the Lord willing, sometime near the end of January 2019 and take up with the book of Exodus. With that, our time is up for today. Please join us, Lord willing, tomorrow when we will conclude our study of Genesis with a review of what was revealed to us in this book.
Thank you, Jeremy. And to our viewers, we also thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button below. Should you have a question or comment, please leave them below or email them to answerintheword@gmail.com. We'll try to respond to you as quickly as we can. We hope you'll join us, the Lord willing, tomorrow when we will be continuing on our study of the book of Genesis. Goodbye for now and have a great day.
I'm not ashamed to